Nsem-Pii TV. Your mom and boss for you. I think say Obia Nsem-Pii TV.
Entrepreneurship maybe.
Nsem-Pii. Yeah, you ask good questions. I hope sir you continue with your good questions.
Be the first to know Nsem-Pii TV.
Anas Aremeyao Anas investigative journalist bekai expose be brave and ode ababe to eja especially judges expose ono de babe to eja na ye bekai ode sa video no eba no yewra Kennedy compare kon Japan ono lawmaker edema omanfo ewo ase central the barber too, it just said a camera said sa video no Anas Aremeyao Anas the barber too jano and your full video no and or the by minimum the koye in ye sa judges na Anas Aremeyao Anas call nase okoye on secret video na one take bribe no ya dey say a bill baby no na barber ye the highest bidder wo sika no say obobo no na obetimi utua na wayi video the film na no na yewura Kennedy Japan this asem we eba betu edwano na Anas Aremeyao Anas esusu said the yewura Kennedy Japan eka no yade se opese odigu no mufinti Anas Aremeyao Anas etabiri yewura Kennedy compare kon Japan de no ekokopie mu ewo court say court no nhwe na onka no because Kennedy egu ne mufin that was defamation suit ena ode no ekokopie mu nanso asem no eba no awieye no na Anas Aremeyao Anas edi nkugu enya asem kotoa no di nkukuo no judge otena akonwa ne so no ade ese ni ruling no ode betu dwa ena ode eka se Anas investigate or like or terrorist investigative terrorist eni nsem bebre ena judge no eka edefa ho na eno ena Anas tabiri sa lower court no ekokopie mu Supreme Court say Supreme Court nhwe na lower court decision no ode bai no ono Anas Aremeyao Anas ensin ne tirim enti Supreme Court enye na onhwe na ruling no one overturn no na eno ena Supreme Court nso ekọ asetena no 5 panel members no one ekotena asem no outcome efiri mu ebaye enie.
In the 97-page 3-2 majority decision, they hold that Justice Eric Barr did no wrong in his use of, quote, strong words, and quote, and or, quote, crudeness of his language, quotations close, because he was simply assessing and evaluating facts and evidence before him. And that's exactly the job of a judge. Anas is accused of indirectly seeking to gag the judge by accusing him of bias or prejudice, hate, and personal dislike. They insist that the appropriate method to question the analysis, inferences, findings, and conclusions of the judge is by an appeal and not resort to the supervisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to quash the judgment. More so when this process does not allow them to go into the record of the trial. The first of the two grounds for the certiorari application, being that the judge lacked jurisdiction, was roundly and unanimously dismissed by all 5 judges. They argued that the fact that Eric Barr did the case as a relieving judge and would be reassigned by Chief Justice Enin Yeboah to continue the case at the request of Mr. Ejapong, at a time that court got a substantive judge, does not invalidate the judgment. And in any case, Anas did not object, but participated fully to the end. If Anas had won, will he be complaining of injustice? Justice Asiedu quizzes. They seem to advise that if he had any such complaints, he should have raised it while the trial was ongoing. Now the minority, dissent, led by Justice Emmanuel Yoni Kolendi, violently disagreed with the three. He and Justice Isufu Umoro Tanko Amadou, after referencing the judicial oath and reciting cases that cautioned judges against what the High Court judge did, cited a plethora of cases that support granting Anase Sechirairai on the grounds of lack of fairness, bias, or prejudice. They praised the judge for beautifully outlining the law on defamation, but condemned him for failing to apply it and rather acting injudiciously, capriciously, demonstrating hate for Anas and his methods of journalism, and literally convicting him of crimes in a civil suit without due process, without evidence, and without the opportunity of being heard. It is an explosive dissent, but I share only a couple of the paragraphs of what will definitely dominate discussions in legal circles and the public in the coming week. First, Justice Yoni Kolendi. He says, I find it even more perplexing that a court exercising civil jurisdiction will find that the applicant, that's Anas, is guilty of having taken bribes and being dishonest, fraudulent, a cheat, an extortionist, a thief, a blackmailer, and corrupt. Equally baffling is the trial court's finding that a description of Anas as a criminal, murderer, extortionist, blackmailer, corrupt, land grabber, tax evader, bribe taker, cheat, interferer in the administration of justice, email hacker, among others, are truthful and factual. He says, there can be no greater affront to the rights and honor of a litigant who resorts to the sanctuary of justice to vindicate his rights than this preconceived, biased, prejudiced, and ill-motivated views which the trial judge held of Anas even before he embarked on a trial of the case before him. Needless to say that the trial judge was merely pretending to adjudicate, even though he was already harboring these opinions of Anas and animosities against him for his work, methodologies, and prominence. He continued, I must hasten to emphasize that it matters not whether or not these statements were made within jurisdiction, as even statements made within jurisdiction may evince a latently held bias or prejudice harbored by a judge for or against a party. Then he continued, just sharing just a few of them with you. He continued, he said, that Anas is, to say the least, a victim of judicial defamation, a violation which, in my view, is more grievous, that his complaint against the interested party, that is Kene Japan, which landed him before the trial court in the first place. He had other very harsh words, but I conclude on this. He says that the judge's personal reservations, disapproval and dislike for Anas and his modus operandi had poisoned his mind, blinded and disabled him from being an open-minded and impartial adjudicator of the matters before him. He says, what the judge did were indicative of a deep-seated personal dislike of the person and investigative methods of Anas. One would ask, was Anas on trial for murder, terrorism, or the host of other crimes that were imputed to him by the judge? He says the judge only stopped short of sentencing Anas. This type of unrestrained, intemperate judicial arbitrariness, motivated by obvious personal dislike of a citizen, in the sanctuary of justice of all places, ought to be deprecated, disapproved, and rejected in the strongest terms. The toxic, caustic, and unsavory descriptions of Anas by the trial judge is a classic example of a violent abuse of judicial power, privilege, and prerogative in the deployment of language under the guise of judgments. What did his brother say? Briefly, Tanko Amadou said, with all due respect to the judge, it is my view that it is obvious that he was actually actuated by his self-conceived notion of Anas's supposed improper investigative methods and thus discarded the core issues before him. In fact, the judgment as rendered was indubitably informed by these personal dislikes and against Anas, and not based on the law and evidence placed before the judge. From a reading of the judgment, it is obvious that the judge deliberately set up the delivery to assist the cause of Kennedy Japan. Lastly, Justice Tanko says, I must express my admiration for the judge for his elaborate and erudite evaluation of the law on defamation. While I expected that based on the law so propounded, the judge would apply same to the facts and evidence, the judge, unfortunately, did not just descend into the arena of conflict, but pursued a line of what, in my view, is an improper reliance of extraneous matters against Anas, which were not relevant in the determination of the suit, which associate Anas with criminality. This was at a stage of the proceedings where Anas was not and could not have been heard on those matters. And that will be my take. Look for the judgment and enjoy it. Explosive. My guest in the studio, Dr.